This happens every year. Can we just come a little bit closer? I know Grace is intimidating in her combat boots, but she's not. Oh, so everybody stepped like 3 steps. Let's come. Thank you, Gracie. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Mathieu, the First Assistant Attorney General, and it's my privilege on behalf of General Paxton to allow me to welcome all of you as we show appreciation once again this year to the members of our military, past and present. I'd like to begin today's event by thanking just a few folks who have made this celebration, and that's really what it is, a celebration of the men and women who work among us who have served. First, I'd like to thank our friends from Texas State University, from the Air Force ROTC Honor Guard who are with us today. They're led by Staff Sergeant Pablo Torres. Pablo, wave, is their leader, along with Captain Adrian Martinez, 3rd Class Isabella Pedraza, 3rd Class Victoria Smith, and 3rd Class Michael Gonzalez. We really appreciate you guys coming up from San Marcos today to be with us and present the colors. Tina, thank you for being with us. Tina serves as the Veterans Program Coordinator with the City of Austin, and she is an Air Force veteran. Also would like to thank Jennifer Speller, our Marine from the 8th floor, and Gracie Hilton, both from Executive Administration, for assisting with the PowerPoint presentation that you're all enjoying, and helping Grace in coordinating. Also, thanks to Kevin Schaefer and Kyle Mashburn from our comms division, who assisted with the setup, taking some pictures and video for us today. John Law, who's a U.S. Army veteran, who's from our IT division, who assisted with the slideshow, the setup, and believe it or not, this year we are live streaming. Isn't that exciting? That's why we're keeping Rylander off camera today. Also, we thank John Hernandez, a U.S. Army veteran from our building services, Debbie Von Cannon, a U.S. Air veteran from our tort division, John Knight, a U.S. Army veteran from facilities and asset management, who all assisted in making sure that we had all 170 of these pictures hung around the rotunda. Sherry, where are you, Sherry? Wave, Sherry. We thank Sherry, our admin assistant in information governance, for assisting with the setup today, and the all-important facilitating the donation of our cookie from the Great American Cookie Company. And we appreciate Jim and Barbara Wills from the Great American Cookie Company, who for the 2nd year have donated a cookie that we can enjoy after today's festivity. And least, but certainly not last, there would not be this celebration without Grace Moody. And so we so much appreciate her. She is, as I was telling Terry, she is our chief on the 8th floor, and we so much appreciate our Navy veteran, Grace Moody, all the work that she does as our Veterans Affairs liaison. Let's give Grace and everyone else a round of applause. One thing that I make sure that I ask Brittany to do for me is that when we decide that today is the day, that this becomes an importance for me to be here. Because I just have so much respect, so much gratitude for the men and women who served in harm's way, who sacrificed time away from family, time away from friends, to serve and to protect and defend us. And I so appreciate them. And then, for so many of them who then take the next step and come back, and that service was not the end of their service to our country, that they decided to continue to serve as members in state government, whether it be at OAG or at SOA, at DIR, that they continue to serve with us, and we so appreciate them. The Office of Attorney General currently employs approximately 300 veterans who represent the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, the Army National Guard, and our Texas National Guard. And of course, as you know, we also employ surviving spouses and orphans of service members. And on behalf of General Paxton, I just want to, those men and women who have served and now continue to choose to serve, I want to personally just thank you. I thank you each for your military service and your continued service to the people of Texas. The Veterans Honor Board that we have the pictures up and in the slideshow, 170 of those 300 have given us photos, and we're able to have on their service. We're so appreciative of those veterans who work at the Office of Attorney General, at DIR, at the State Office of Risk Management, at SOA. During a broadcast, a BBC broadcast, you guys know, you knew you were not going to get away without me talking about Churchill on of all day Veterans Day, because my mind immediately goes to World War II and immediately goes to who I think was the greatest leader of the 20th century, and perhaps one of the greatest leaders of all time, Winston Churchill. But during a broadcast on the BBC back in the summer of 1940, and just a little footnote, the summer of 1940 was not a great time in Britain. It was when truly democracy, whether England was going to survive, and I would submit whether democracy would survive, was much in doubt. It's prior to the United States entering the war, and it was still at that time, it wasn't a given that the United States would enter the war. But during that time, which was clearly one of the darkest times in World War II, Churchill talked about a war that was being fought and that would be fought, a war of unknown warriors. Churchill observed, "This is no war of chieftains or of princes, of dynasties or national ambitions. It's a war of peoples and of causes. There are vast numbers, not only in this island, but in every land, who will render faithful service in this war, but whose names will never be known, whose deeds will never be recorded. This is a war of the unknown warriors. But let all strive without failing in faith or in duty, and the dark curse of Hitler will be lifted from our age." I think what Churchill described about World War II is a description that's appropriate to any conflict that any nation, especially a nation that is freedom-loving, finds itself in. And I would submit to you, in the history of the United States, there are countless unknown warriors who we don't know their names, and maybe for a brief time at some military ceremony they may have been honored because of their gallantry, but that the vast amount of Americans have no idea that they served. No idea that they sacrificed. No idea of what they went through. And I think Veterans Day to me is an opportunity to just take a moment and recognize so many men and so many women, so many unknown warriors have sacrificed and selflessly served to protect us, to defend freedom. And today we're going to get to meet some of them. I challenge you to look at the names, to look at the PowerPoint. But you know, among us, serving among us every day as employees in the state, in the words of Churchill, we have a bunch of unknown warriors. You know, they're always reluctant to tell their stories. They just are. That's the men and women that they are. But I encourage you, take a few minutes, find out their stories. And then I encourage you, thank them. Thank them for their service. Several of our OAG veterans, for instance, are highly decorated, including recipients of the Silver Star Medal, the Legion of Merit, Distinguished Service Medal, Bronze Star Medal, and the Purple Heart. And you'll see in these photos around this room the medals that they've received. Today, recognizing all of those men and women, I wanted to highlight one of perhaps our most highly decorated veteran, but certainly one of the most highly decorated. One of those, in Churchill's words, unknown warriors. And it's Terry Bradford. Terry, why don't you let everybody know? Someone said he looks like Santa Claus. I don't think that's true. Terry currently serves as a project manager in our CS systems development as part of the wonderful team that we have supporting our folks at Child Support. He's been with OAG since June 1st, 2017. Prior to that, Terry spent a fair amount of time, 13 years at Dell, where he worked with Dell. And then prior to that, Terry was a first sergeant in the U.S. Army, serving from 1975 to 1996. So from 75 to 1996. Sergeant Bradford, now listen to this. Sergeant Bradford was is the recipient of a Silver Star Medal, which is awarded for gallantry in action, a Legion of Merit, which is awarded for superior or exceptionally meritorious service, a Bronze Star Medal, which is awarded for heroism in combat zone or meritorious service in a war zone, and a Purple Heart, which actually I think he told me a little bit ago he actually has 2 Purple Hearts. During one of his ceremonies, in which Terry was awarded the Silver Star for heroic acts that he committed during the invasion of Grenada back in 1984. And let me just take a minute and read this citation because I think it says it better than I can. The President of the United States of America, authorized by an act of Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Silver Star to Staff Sergeant Terry L. Bradford, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity in action while serving as an infantry team leader attached to Company A, 2nd Battalion, 75th Infantry Regiment, conducting combat operations on the island of Grenada in support of Operation Urgent Fury. Staff Sergeant Bradford was in the first sortie of 4 helicopters engaged in an air assault on the, I'm not going to get these names right, Terry, Calvingly compound, which is held by hostile Cuban forces. Upon landing in the compound under intense enemy fire, Staff Sergeant Bradford assumed his defensive position and witnessed the other 3 helicopters losing control and crashing into one another. He immediately ran 25 meters across open terrain to the aircraft, thus exposing himself to intensive enemy fire, flying chaparral, say it, sharp, you got it. And my speech impediment always shows up. And the possible explosion of the burning aircraft. He also directed the actions of 2 medics and established medical priorities for the treatment of the injured. With only the lives of his fallen comrades in mind, and while still in the open and exposed to automatic weapons and small arms fire, he began administering first aid to the critically wounded. Upon the arrival of the battalion physician's assistant, he returned to the crashed aircraft several times, removing the wounded soldiers and carrying them across open terrain to a safer location where he could administer medical aid. Staff Sergeant Bradford's gallant and courageous actions directly resulted in the saving of several lives. His heroic efforts at the risk of his own life were in keeping with the finest traditions of military service. This is one of those unknown warriors. Please join me in thanking Terry Bradford. Well, in a different time, in a different type of service, but nevertheless, an unknown warrior who serves among us is one of our speakers today. It's my honor to get to introduce our special speaker, Stormy Kelly. Stormy, as many of you know, serves as the director of OAG's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, a position she has held with our agency since 2015. Mifuku is comprised of nearly 200 investigators, auditors, attorneys, and support staff. In 2018, this past year, under Stormy's leadership, OAG's Mifuku was named the best in the nation by the U.S. Health and Human Services Inspector General. Stormy is a 29-year veteran of law enforcement. Now, if you're doing what I did when I was reading this, and I know a lot of this, I was trying to add up and trying to figure out, Stormy is like way older than I thought she was. That was my first thought. It's just that she's not. She's just compact a lot of service. She started really young. She said she went into the military at age 5. You didn't know that, Mark, did you? She went in at 5. I didn't know they'd let you in, but at 5. Stormy is a 29-year veteran of Texas law enforcement. While at OAG, Stormy has served in the Houston Area Healthcare Fraud Task Force and on the Medicare, Medicaid Healthcare Fraud Strike Force. She has worked with both state and federal investigations involving physicians, nurses, counselors, dentists, providers, and ambulance companies, to just name a few. Before becoming the director, Stormy was the captain for 2 of the investigation teams in Houston. Now, prior to even that career at OAG, Stormy served for over 13 years with the Tarrant County Sheriff's Department in Fort Worth, where she was a patrol officer. She never pulled you over, did she, Mark? Did she pull you over in Tarrant County? Okay, you'll just take the 5th. She was a patrol officer, an academy instructor, a detective, and supervised their criminal investigations division. Prior to that, Stormy served 7 years in the U.S. Navy. Don't you guys make a noise or something? Okay. She served as a petty officer, 2nd class air traffic controller, which I found very interesting. And she served in Texas, California, and in Atsugi. Say it? Atsugi, Japan, in Japan. Please join me in welcoming Stormy Kelly.
That was pretty much my speech. I'm done. So, veterans, Sergeant Bradford, First Assistant Mateer, executive staff, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm going to start with a question. What is the theme of your life? You don't have to answer right now, we'll come back to it. Those that know me know that I'm a pretty straightforward, pull no punches, don't ask me if you don't want to know what I think kind of person. I'm not given to emotional moments or touchy-feely events or busy work for the sake of checking off the box. I'm not much on small talk, I'm not good at telling stories, and I'm not that funny. Yet even knowing all of that, someone asked me to talk to you today. Go figure, huh? So do you know that in a nation of over 300 million people, only about 20 million of us are veterans? It's a pretty small number, about 6% or so. And when I stop to think about the enormous impact that small group has had on this nation and on the world, I can't help but be awed by that. So we're here today to pay tribute to those amongst us who have served the greatest country on earth by raising their right hand, by swearing an oath, and by committing to service before self. And no matter how you served, what branch, what duty station, what rank you held, what job you did, it took courage to take the first step, to make the first move, to decide to join the military. And for that, we're all thankful for all of your service. You know, we all have a story, a theme, if you will, that defines us. And some of our stories are riveting. I can't possibly live up to Sergeant Bradford's story. And some of our themes are inspirational. And the rest of us are pretty mundane. I would say that mine falls into the quiet, not so glamorous, even mundane end of that scale. If I had to describe it, I would say that responsibility, but hand in hand with that, service, is one of the first themes that I can identify in my life. I was the firstborn to a mother who was the oldest of 4 children, who spent the first 10 years of her life surviving the Great Depression, and then the next 6 years with her father, my grandfather, serving at Cedar in World War II. My father was the oldest of 6 children, and he joined the Navy 2 years into a full-ride football scholarship. And that handsome, wide-eyed hunk of an All-American football player found himself stationed in Rota, Spain, flying over North Africa in an aircrew. So I was the oldest child of two oldest children, and service to country was woven into the fabric of both sides of my family. So you can only imagine that, one, I grew up believing that service was incumbent on all of us, and that two, I've been telling people what to do since I was old enough to talk. I moved around a lot because of my father's work when I was a kid. The moving and the normal advancement through grade school and middle school and high school, combined with one move to accommodate desegregation, and yes, I'm that old, caused me to attend 13 schools in kindergarten through the 12th grade. I went to one school for 3 years, but I also went to 3 schools in 1 year, and I had perfect attendance that year. Again, go figure, right? So as you can imagine, when I finished high school, this keeps feeding back. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, so you can imagine, when I finished high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go, but I was drawn to the military, and for some reason, I thought that the Navy was a natural fit for me. So when I took the ASVAB test, which is kind of a military entrance exam, I scored very well, and I was offered a position as one of the first women in the Navy's nuclear program. Now, if there was going to be a funny part of this presentation, this was it, because can any of you imagine me as a nuke? No, neither could I. I was pretty sure that wasn't going to be a good fit and that the nuclear program and I would not be friends for long, so I opted instead to take their offer to be an air traffic controller. Again, a job about which I knew nothing, because for those of you that are a little bit older, the movie Airplane had not been released yet. So yes, being an air traffic controller was my first real job. We had to complete the same training and the same licensing exams as our FAA counterparts, but we did it in about a third of the time that they did. And nobody told me that it was supposed to be a stressful job. I loved it. To this day, I think it was one of the best jobs that I ever had. And icing on the cake, I got paid to tell people what to do every day. So after boot camp in Orlando, Florida, and A school in Millington, Tennessee, which is right outside of Memphis, this little girl from South Alabama and Central Florida ended up in El Centro, California, which is down by the Calexico-Mexicali border. It's a lovely little location I affectionately refer to as one of the armpits of the earth. They're, however, better known for being the winter home of the Blue Angels, so every day during the winter we got at least a little bit of an air show. Not quite Top Gun, but a little bit of an air show. Next, I was at Chase Field, which is in Beeville, which is right down the highway from here. At that time, it was one of 3 primary jet training bases for Navy and Marine Corps pilots. You guys know that the Navy trains the Marine Corps, right?
Yes, we are.
See? Okay. I was also at Naval Air Station, or Naval Air Facility at Atsugi, Japan, which is the home to the air wing of the only carrier that was in Japan at the time. In Atsugi, the United States Navy and the Japanese Navy shared the base, and there was an American liaison for each Japanese control tower crew. So I was one of those liaisons. Now, this came as a big shock to the crew that I was assigned to, because at the time, there were no women air traffic controllers in Japan, not military and not civilian. So you can imagine their surprise as young Japanese sailors when they walked in the control tower and found themselves working with a young, blonde-eyed, at the time, or blue-eyed, very blonde American woman who was taller than they were and frankly had shoulders broader than theirs. Yeah. It didn't take as long as I thought it might have for us to all get used to each other. And I became the first woman that was ever certified to work in the control tower without a Japanese supervisor plugged into the console with me. It was a huge coup in that environment and in their culture, and I think it took a lot of fortitude on their part, particularly at that time, to certify a woman to be certified to work by herself there. So a lot of kudos to them for that. My last assignment was at North Island, California, on Coronado, across the bay from San Diego, and that's not a bad place to end. But it was, after all, California, and I was, after all, pretty glad to get out of there. So that's my little kind of as promised mundane part of military service. But I would be remiss if I didn't share the lifelong impact that's had on me. Things like that never happen in a vacuum. So early on, as I looked back, I felt a little bit unworthy of the kudos and the acknowledgement that we showed our veterans. I felt kind of like if I didn't serve in wartime, if I didn't get those medals, then I probably wasn't as worthy of that as others. But here's what I've learned. Our military superiority, our preeminence, yes, our preeminence, is not just built on a rally at wartime. It's built on our ongoing, never-ending dedication to always be ready. It takes every one of us doing our part every day, even when we don't think that it matters, because our preeminence in and of itself is the deterrent. You know the saying, if you want peace, prepare for war? I think that philosophy hits the nail squarely on the head, and I think it also has applications far beyond the military. It has applications in our everyday lives, and it has applications right here. I use the same philosophy every day. I strive for us to always be as ready as we can for any challenge. I'm constantly building our resources by hiring the best, by training, by practicing, and by building leaders. I want to ensure that every aspect over which I have control will be placed in good and capable hands when the time comes for today's leaders to hand over the mantle to the next generation. In closing, I'll circle back to the beginning when I asked you about your theme. I would encourage you to make your theme service before self, and not just today, but every day. To remember that because of the courage and the commitment and the sacrifice of our veterans, we live in the indisputably best country in the world. And since we're here to honor those who served, I'll leave you with my thoughts on how we can best honor them. I think we should strive to live our best lives every day. I think we should make the absolute most of the freedoms that their service has given us. And last, and maybe most importantly, in our own lives, we should strive to put service before self. Thank you for having me.
Retire the colors. Hoorah!